Welcome everybody. Thank you ever so much for joining us today. We are here to discuss the challenges facing businesses and women when it comes to encouraging women into technical roles and retaining women in technical roles once they've been recruited. We've got three great speakers with us today. Emma Jackson is the Client Innovation Manager here at Mills Reeve. Edwin is the Commercial Growth Director at Freestyle, and Kevin Dainty is the Client Relationship Manager for the Technology Division at Recruitment, and founder of the Reed Women in Tech Mentoring Programme. So before we get started, I'll just run through some housekeeping points. We expect the session to run for somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour. Each speaker is going to talk for about 10 minutes at the start of the session, and then there will be the ability to ask questions at the end. Please do pop any questions that you have into the Q&A box. They will all be treated anonymously, but if you want to follow up with a particular speaker afterwards, their LinkedIn contact details will be circulated following the event. The session today is being recorded, and that will also be made available to you after the event. And finally, you'll see a feedback survey pop up at the end of the webinar. Please do let us have your feedback. We'd be delighted to hear from you. And if you have any ideas for future sessions that you'd like us to run, then we'd be delighted to review those ideas as well. So please do fill that in. So without further ado, let's get cracking. Our first speaker today is Emma Jackson. Emma leads our client innovation team here at Mills Reeve. She won last Friday, and we're all very proud of her, the Female Innovator of the Year award at the Innovation Awards. Thoroughly well deserved, Emma.
Thank you.
So embarrassing me. Before you start, so do you want to share your story with us and how you got here?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. So I'm Emma Jackson. As Fay says, I'm the Client Innovation Manager at Mills Reeve. I've actually been with the firm for 17 years and 2 weeks. Everyone counts. I haven't always been an innovation manager. It did not exist 17 years and 2 weeks ago. I joined the firm from a small practice where I was doing lots and lots of different roles, and I actually joined the firm here as a legal secretary. So I was in the private client team based in the Birmingham office, and I did that for a good couple of years. So I'd always had a sort of technical interest, computers, and I was the secretary who fixed the printer when everything broke and all that kind of all the usual sort of starts to be ins into technology. But when I first moved down to Birmingham, it was a much easier thing to apply and get a job as a secretary than it was to get a job in a technical role, especially as a woman. So I joined the firm there, and then a couple of years later I was encouraged by my senior secretary to apply for the IT trainer position, which became available, and I took that role on. So I applied, was interviewed, all the usuals, and I took that role on, but it was a split role. So I was doing 3 days a week in training, and initially I was doing 2 days a week as a secretary. That was quite difficult when this was back in the day of folders, and you'd have fee earners knocking on the training room door to find out where their file was, and it didn't quite work. But I spent a lot of my time then with the IT department, so I was with them for the 3 days a week. As part of that, I came in one weekend to help them do a big upgrade. So I was helping the support team, the guys, do a upgrade over a weekend. And, it was logical, it was easy. And after that, they actually offered me the other 2 days as service desk. So I moved then full-time into the IT team. And I was doing, it's still a split role, 3 days training, 2 days on service desk. but it worked really, really well for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I did that for over a decade. So yeah, so I spent a full decade in the IT team, which was cross office. So we've got people in all of our offices that look after IT. And for the entire decade, I was the only girl in the department, which was quite a big thing. There's been more since. I think I was a pioneer, not a lone star. But I was absolutely the only girl in the team, and that can be quite isolating, I suppose, at points. But they were great. So I'm still very good friends with all of them. I still work with them on a regular basis. I sort of class myself as part of IT, even though now I'm technically in knowledge learning and development in innovation. But I spent a decade with them, and it was absolutely great. During that decade, I had my 2 babies. So I had my son and my daughter. And actually, the IT team, they treated me like I was the sister of everybody there. I don't think they'd have let me carry a keyboard up the stairs if I needed to the entire time I was pregnant. They were very, very protective and nice. And, you know, I did really enjoy it. Towards the end of the decade with them, I started doing more and more projects. So I think with the knowledge that comes over time, and it really was just taking every opportunity that came along. I started to work on more and more projects, and because of the nature of my technical background, I started to get the whizzy projects. So I started to get the AIs, the automations, the document automation, the workflow, everything that was sort of new and a little bit different. At the same time, Mills Reeve were working on their innovation strategy, which is part of our sort of firm strategy, was at the point to create a culture of innovation, and now it's to be a leader in innovation. And the two kind of fit really nicely hand in hand. So I was one of the innovation champions. I was working on technical projects. I was looking at the AIs and the automations, and that role actually became innovation. So I was the first member of the innovation team that was full-time. We had champions prior to me. We're up to about 40 innovation champions across the business. But I was the first person whose full-time role it was to be innovative, basically, which was amazing. I was joined shortly after by 2 more colleagues, both women, Jodie and Vic, one doing process and one doing engagement. And that worked really well with the sort of people, process, technology side of things. I look after the technology, and they've got one side of the triangle each as well. So the 3 of us worked really hard. We did a lot over the first couple of years, but then the pandemic hit and everything grew exponentially, and all of a sudden everybody wanted to collaborate online, which is what I've been telling them for 3 years at that point. And sort of since then, the team has grown significantly. So there's now 10 of us. We've run a really successful project and innovation trainee program. The first 2 grads that we've had through, one was male and one was female. They both stayed with us, and they're still in the business. And we've just taken 2 new ones on 2 weeks ago. So they've just joined the team as well to take us back up to 10. But with the 75% female team. I think the really interesting thing about that is that nobody in the team joined us as a technical role. They all joined us from other bits of the business. So it's completely organic, it's homegrown. They've come across from being executive assistants and administrative assistants. And Jodie used to be a lawyer. Vic used to work in marketing. Jodie's still a lawyer. She can't quite get away from it, you know. But Vic used to work in marketing on tenders, and that's really helped with the engagement of it around the business. But they are real. It's all been around taking opportunities that were presented and putting yourself out your comfort zone and applying for something that might not necessarily feel like, you know, you're the right fit for, but actually it can be amazing. I didn't leave school going, I really want to be a client innovation manager in a law firm. It just didn't happen. Whereas now, actually, you know, I'm doing a job that didn't exist. What job will my kids be doing and my daughter be doing in 10 years? Well, not 10 years, she's only 8. But when she's old enough, what job will she be doing? And it could well be something else that doesn't exist yet. But chances are it will be something in a technical capacity, because that is where the future lies. But yeah, that is me, and that's how I got here. I feel really passionately about helping women into technical roles, and supporting them while they're there as well. I do quite a lot of volunteering in schools and things, and it is always interesting when you hear a young girl say, "Oh, I really want to work with computers." You know, my ears prick up, and I'm excited straight away for the future. But it is that is me, and that's how I got to be here as innovation manager.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you ever so much, Emma. Really good to hear your story, and I'm sure we'll have some fantastic questions coming from the audience off the back of that. So as I said before, please do pop your questions in the QA box if you have any, following each of our speakers stints. So moving on now to Kay. Kay, thank you ever so much for joining us. You're the Commercial Growth Director at Freestyle. You specialise in understanding clients' businesses and helping them with their digital strategies. So again, please do share how you stepped into that role.
Super. Well, I've got some slides to share, and thanks, Emma. That was absolutely fascinating to hear about your journey, and there's quite a few synergies, I think, between your journey and my journey as well, so that's quite an interesting take on things. I'm just going to share my screen, guys, because I've got a few slides to share with you all. Okay, let's do that one. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Yep, superb. Okay, so my name's Kay. I am Commercial Growth Director. So my role is really looking after the number figure, the financials for the business. And Freestyle is a technical agency. So we look after customers' digital transformation. So it could be looking after defining what their digital strategy is going to be, or what their technical platform is going to be. There's quite a few synergies, I think, with what you're doing, Emma, and my role. But I've been in the business for 10 years. I've been in digital for 15. So I started out when CD-ROMs were state of the art, and I now work all the way through to AI and Web3. So I've seen quite a big change in that respect. I'm a mentor as well, so I'm a Beamer mentor, and I work for Find Your Wings as a voluntary mentor, just to help women return to work either after a period of leave or after mat leave, and just really rediscover their confidence to get going. I'm also a mum of 2. I own a really smelly but lovable Labrador, and try and do a bit of CrossFit and running in my spare time. So that's me. So my story starts really when I moved to Bristol, and I worked for a digital agency. That was my first digital experience, and I started working with Microsoft, Samsung and Toshiba. So from my very early days as an exec in quite a busy agency, it became apparent that women didn't really hold many senior positions, or any positions in the digital space, both from a client and agency side. And I think especially in the land in digital and tech, and when you're looking at quite, quite in-depth tech, as Microsoft would, it was amazing to see how the kind of male and female ratio worked. So it wasn't until I really moved to Freestyle in the heart of Warwickshire that I thought, actually, maybe I could do something to change this, or to level up the playing field a bit. And Freestyle has a female owner and founder. So she was always leading the way in terms of what could be done, and always really encouraging of kind of the female position and place within the business. So with that, it kind of lit a fire in me to try and drive change. And quite often I was the only female in the room when I'm presented to clients, and almost by default you feel like you have to justify your seat at the table, and quite often I'd be the one presenting. I can see Emma nodding, you've been in this position as well. I'd be the one leading the meeting, and the client would be expecting me to take the notes. So it's been a really interesting change, I think, over the last 10 years, but I think 10 years later, you know, having come in as an exec and moved up to commercial director, I'm able to then hopefully give some tips and expertise on how we then attract people, especially females, to the technical industry, but also how you start retaining those individuals as well. So here we go. Advice for women looking to join the sector. So it's really a case of where do we begin? And I think, I don't know if you've seen this or heard of this, but Getty Images create a fabulous image library called the Lean In collection. And I'm a big advocate of you can't be what you can't see. And I too have a daughter, and I'm in a career that wasn't told or advertised to me when I was at school or college. Nobody said you could go and be a commercial director in a technical agency when I was 16, 18, 21. That wasn't even a thing. So I very much came in at the client services level and then thought, actually, I understand this and I can do this. And there's other people who are very talented, but are kind of coming into this profession from a kind of sideways in perspective. And I think if you're looking to attract women into the technical space, you have to put women at the forefront of your marketing efforts. So you've got to put a female on your Instagram ad, you have to put a female project manager on your LinkedIn adverts, and at least one female on your interview panel. And it really taps into being, you can't be what you can't see. And if I look at other agencies in our competitive field, and I look at their marketing collateral, I can see the places who are looking to even up that gender difference and the places that are very heavily male dominated. And typically we have an in-house development team, and we've actually got 2 female devs on it, which we're really pleased about. And we've worked hard over the years. I mean, I was one of 4 women when I started 10 years ago in an agency of 30. And now we're kind of sitting 60-40 female male. And I'm not male bashing at all through this. So Kevin, this is not aimed at you at all. But it's just really important, I think, to really encourage and nurture the fire that we see in women in this technical space. And we have to kind of play by semi-different roles. And the Getty Lean In collection is actually an image library of thousands of images. And it's a really powerful depiction of the role of women and girls. So it also puts women as mechanics, but also mums, and it puts men as earners as well as caretakers. So it's a really even playing field. So that would be my first suggestion. Secondly, I'd also say embrace a community. There is loads of technical communities out there, and if you're looking to join this sector, there's many free mentorship schemes that you can be a part of. You've only really got to Google where you are in the country, and there's always some kind of meetup going on. You can also reach out to people on LinkedIn. I've done that when I moved into my commercial role, and as soon as they realize you're not selling anything, it's actually a really lovely, safe space to interrogate people about the role you want to get into or about the wider sector, and chat, get involved, and make sure that you're informed before you're kind of moving ahead with it, to make sure that it is what you want to do. There's the Hive Index. That is a global kind of rundown of tech communities. So anything from girls coding to the Women Know Tech group on Facebook. And there's also Birmingham Tech Week, which is very local to us, where lots of local providers come and businesses come who are prepared to mentor individuals for free. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. And lastly, I guess this taps into me personally, but try and attract women at every stage of their journey. So particularly in the technical field, I was nodding and grinning when Emma said about her maternity leave and the people in and around the business looking after her during her pregnancy, because whether you're talking to the young employee or you're talking to the woman who wants to have a family or the woman that does have a family, you've really got to show that your business is able to look after individuals at every stage of that journey. So the young employee may want additional training or want to, for example, get a gold certification in a particular development platform. The working parent may look for you to be Flextra accredited or have hybrid working standards, and even expecting parents, both for men and women, what the mat and pat leave packages look like. So if you're looking at evening up that playing field, there's also more you can do, I think, around making sure that you're attracting people at every stage of that journey. So advice for retaining women. Again, I can only really talk about my own experience, but given my role in the business, I sit on the leadership team. I've kind of got 5 tips really for how we look at and how we personally retain female talent at Freestyle. So challenging work feeds the mind. Now, we found actually over pay rises, giving staff, especially women in these roles, work that really challenges them and pushes them from a mental capacity is a really good retention scheme and a really good retention mechanism. Giving a good variety of work, not leaving individuals to stagnate on the same piece of project work for a long time, really helps them to feel like they're developing and progressing. We see, I mean, I've worked in multiple agencies and I've seen both. So I'd absolutely say if you're getting females into these roles, keep feeding that kind of challenging work and make sure that it's spread evenly between the team. Foster a supportive team. So this is something that we're really passionate about at Freestyle. If you're a business owner or part of a leadership team, it's really important that you define a hierarchy that means you can foster a supportive team. So encourage collaboration, encourage shared problem solving, celebrate the highs as a collective, but also the lows as a collective, and celebrate one another. So we have an internal message feed called Slack at Freestyle with a hashtag recognise channel. And this is a space for peers to say, Emma did a really great job on this project. The client was over the moon with the activity and the work. Hashtag recognise, brilliant job. And it's just fostering that collective team effort as opposed to individuals. And especially, I think, given the working world now, we have people at home, we have people in the office. That office collective isn't always working in the same space. So this is especially important. Flexer and hybrid. So Freestyle and Flexer accredited, but we also really adhere to our kind of hybrid working scheme. Post the pandemic, the world of work is very, very different, as we all know. But many women are enjoying the benefits, I think, of the flexible working. So if they're juggling childcare or even people juggling passions outside of work, we've got some really keen rowers who get up at crazy o'clock in the morning and row down the river in Warwick. But it just means that their working day is slightly different. You need to have trust in the organisation to be able to do that. But I think if you can get those accreditations and show that you can actually work with people who have families or who have passions outside, it's all for the benefit of the wider business. Find a way to say thank you. So when you're looking at retaining female talent, I think a really empathetic approach works best. We offer things like benefits that are sort of free, so to speak, for the business. So giving out either additional leave or some businesses I know offer Amazon vouchers to say thank you for work on a collective project. We have our recognise channel. Also, we have a company nomination, so company recognition for somebody in our all agency meeting to say so-and-so did a great job on a piece of project work, and we give out a little bit of money every month just to say thank you, you've done a great job. And we also nominate individuals for awards and speaker slots. So we're quite big on building individuals' profiles in the industry. And I think especially for females, it's something that we're super passionate about. I mean, we've gone from being an agency with 5 females to now having a kind of 60-40 ratio. We have a female CEO, we have a female MD, and we have a female CD, which is myself. And I've previously worked in that business when I've seen the management team be completely made up of men. And you get a very different perspective, I think, and it's really important, I think, to level that playing field, because both men and women bring different things to the table in that regard. And my last point around retention is top-down support. So I think especially this is applicable to people who have a big say in their business or business owners. You need to set the narrative for the role of women in your business, especially in tech. That's now making time for the business owners to actually chat and listen to that female workforce. So instigate that two-way conversation, because you can only help retain those individuals if you really understand what's happening at that level. So whether it be childcare issues or commute issues or work issues or feelings within the team, I think you have to drive and lead by example in that regard. And I've seen both sides. I've worked in businesses, not at Freestyle, but I've worked with other senior leaders who've suffered burnout, and I've seen exactly what I don't want to be and what I do want to be. And I think that can't be misunderestimated when you're looking at retaining women, especially in the tech space. So I think that's my nutshell. Thank you, Faye.
Super. Thank you, Kay. That was really, really interesting. So thanks ever so much for sharing your insights. Hopefully, sort of picking up on some of the points that you've raised and adding his own thoughts on that. I'd now like to introduce Kevin. Kevin, you've got a number of strings to your bow, but you're here today in your capacity in relation to the work that you've done in helping businesses to increase the diversity within their teams. So you founded the Reed Recruitment Women in Tech Mentoring Programme. I know that you've been heavily involved in helping male allies, and you are a finalist for the Male Agent of Change with the Every Woman Technology Awards. So you're clearly really heavily involved in this space, and I'd love to hear sort of what made you become interested, and the action that you've taken.
Yeah, no, thanks, Faye. Thanks for the introduction. So yeah, I've been working in the tech field as a recruiter for 13 years now. And over that time, I've seen a massive step change in terms of appetite from organizations to be more diverse and be more inclusive, which is great. So that's taken me on a personal journey. So for the last 3 of those 13 years, I'd say I've been heavily focused on the D&I aspects. I've made it my day job. So as well as working with Reeve's client base and companies we don't even have a relationship with to advise them on ways that they can improve their hiring processes. I also took it upon myself, leveraging the goodwill of a lot of people in my network to set up the mentoring program, which is all about coming back to a lot of the things that Fay and Emma said, Kay and Emma said, sorry, is around giving women access to role models and even male allies that can support and develop them in their career. So I do have a slide deck, which I'm going to share. I could quite easily take this slide deck and run a whole day session on it. So intentionally left myself far too much to talk about, knowing that Emma and Kay would have had some great things that I didn't want to duplicate. So I've left myself lots of room to talk around that. This really is going to be a whistle-stop tour of like my best practice advice for how companies should approach the issue of being diverse in general, but obviously with a women in tech lens on that as well. So just get the slides are working. So this to me is the 4 main things to focus on. And if there's one slide in this deck, I'd say to pay attention to is this one. And this will be shared to everyone that's attending and signed up after the session. So as much as it's an individual thing, we can all in our own departments take accountability for trying to be more inclusive and more diverse. I think realistically, if we're going to break the back of this, it has to be a company-wide thing. And like Kay said at the end of her session, it's kind of top down. You need that senior stakeholder buy-in to be able to drive the real change that you need to change to actually implement a lot of the things that we want to do. So part of that, I'm hoping that all you guys that have signed up work in organizations where this is kind of a given now. You don't have to justify the reason for diversity and inclusivity in the workplace. But on my next slide, I'll talk to you about how we can present the business case for diversity. But the key thing in clarity for me is, how do we measure progress and success? So what does good look like? How do we actually know we've achieved good? And where are we at now in our journey? Because every company will be at a different stage of their journey, and they'll have done different things which will have made an impact. But then is that having the impact in the right areas, or are there other areas of the process that are letting us down? For me, it all comes back to culture. Again, this being top down. I view the analogy I use is, if we're trying to get women into the workplace, it's like trying to fill a bucket with water. And if that bucket is not inclusive and it's full of holes, you're going to have a really hard time filling that bucket full of water. And a lot of these techniques that people speak about and invest money in are all about increasing the flow rate. It's about getting more women into that bucket, but there's not enough focus sometimes on filling the holes. So, for me, retention and inclusivity are the 2 main things. First thing to do is tackle the issue of losing people. Have you got a workplace where women are recognised, rewarded, and therefore, for all the reasons that Kay said, do stick around, do have long careers, and Mills Reeve clearly is the case because Emma's been there for a decade plus. So for that, for me, before we focus on how can we get more women into that bucket, it's that how do we stop them leaving? And it all comes down to inclusion. Looking at that, I think that a lot of companies kind of design things inside out. They think what works for us as opposed to what works for the people we're trying to attract. So for me, every stage of the process, I would go for a fine-tooth comb, take a magnifying glass to it, and look at that process and say, why are we doing it? And how does this impact the people that are actually engaging with that process? And we could talk a little bit more about that on the next slides as to what those individual processes are and the people impact. And then the final thing, coming exactly back to you can't be what you can't see. I think celebrating, communicating the successes you're having, making sure that people outside of your business are aware of all the good stuff that you're doing, all the great people that you've got, the recognition that Emma's had recently with the Innovation Award, things like that are massively important to show that you are an organisation that is visibly doing this. not just so that you can attract people, but actually so that the passive people, like the kids in the schools and things that don't know these jobs exist, actually get visibility and awareness of that, and then strive to achieve those things. So I'll skip past this slide very quickly, because for me, this is kind of why we're doing this. And I think it's pretty obvious, but if there's any organizations out there that doubt the reasons that this is really important, each of these images shows you one of those benefits. So, you know, workforces that are more diverse have more ways of thinking, more ways of tackling that challenge. They're more creative. They engage better with their customers, because typically our customers are diverse. And the bottom line is they make more profits. You know, they increase revenue, they increase profits, which fundamentally as a business is the main driver. So any organization that doubts the reason we're doing this, there shouldn't be any hesitation there at all. Inclusion. Now, I'm assuming most people know what inclusion is, but I'll talk very briefly about it, because there's a big difference between diversity and inclusion. The jigsaw analogy there, I think, summarizes it best. So, you know, we can be a diverse organization without being inclusive, and we can also be an inclusive organization without being diverse. You know, the Premier League, I use as an example, probably quite male-dominated example, but I'm a man after all. I think the Premier League is probably, apart from the male-female thing, one of the most diverse places that you will find in the world. You know, there are people from every religion, every company, every country, every culture. There will be straight and LGBT men within that league as well. But is it truly inclusive? I would say absolutely not, because we don't know about the homosexual men that play football, because they don't feel safe coming out and admitting that they are homosexual. Until recently, I would say that, you know, there's big issues around race and things like that. And having, you know, great role models like Mo Salah at Liverpool being a proud Muslim, I think are doing things to change that. But there is a massive difference there between having all the elements and being diverse versus being a truly inclusive place where everyone is celebrated for their differences. Everyone has a sense of belonging, and they know that when they come to work, they don't have to hide anything. They can just be themselves. So that's the first thing is for me is to get your head around, how do we make sure we are inclusive, not just that we've got the numbers and we feel like we're diverse. A lot of that comes back to culture and the people you've got in the organization, how you hire them. And a big thing that I get as a recruiter is people asking for cultural fit. And whenever we challenge their employers on this, a lot of them have a hard time of explaining their cultural fit. And the ones that do make a good job of it probably miss the point. So they tell us like what kind of activities the people in the workforce like to do. So, you know, the IT team, or we all like to go to the pub on a Friday, and, you know, we've got the soccer league or whatever, things that men typically like, which is obviously always going to impact your ability to hire women, because when you're making cultural fit decisions, you're going to look for people like you as opposed to people that share the same values. And that for me is the main thing. It's those values. How would you deal with a situation? How do you face off to your customer? They're the things that for me align culture across an organization, not people's hobbies and, you know, people's interests and all those kind of things. So for me, any company should really focus on what are our core values and how do we live true to that, and are they things that we should be proud of and the people that we have actually acknowledge. And then the final piece is allyship, which I think prime example is in case scenario there where she was the only woman in the team, and she felt like there was an obligation or an expectation from everyone else that she would take the notes and not be the presenter. For me, allyship comes in many shapes and forms, but, you know, a big one about that is making sure that you aren't doing anything to compound the issue, and make sure that, you know, you as a man in the workplace are giving equal opportunity to the other people that are in the organization. And I think if you've got all of these things, you know, you're hiring people that have the shared common values, you foster this culture of allyship, and you truly think about inclusion, and that gives you a great foundation to be able to implement some of the practical steps that we can talk about next to actually hire people into that environment. So human-centered design, so this for me is all about making sure that every process that we do, we're thinking about the people and the impact it has on those people. And that comes from everything from the working environment and the working conditions. So, you know, coming back to hybrid working is a real key in this. And I think it's been a great thing about COVID is that, because I personally think that hybrid working massively increases your opportunity to hire diverse talent, but specifically female talent, because, you know, typically women have more constraints around their time around things they have to do outside of work, looking after the kids, dropping the kids off at school, etc. And a lot of jobs used to be the case that you couldn't do them because you couldn't be in the office at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you couldn't leave the office at 3 o'clock. Whereas now with hybrid working, it's a prime example of being able to change your working environment and conditions to actually directly influence your ability to hire female talent. And there's going to be lots of those things. Employee benefits, again, a lot of employers, when we talk to them, they talk about bonuses and things like that, which might be a motivation for a male or female candidate, but there are other things that are important to people in this day and age. Additional annual leave, more flexible annual leave. There's lots of things. So I would say have a think about the people you're trying to attract and what is going to be interesting to them. Are they interested in money, or are they interested in more healthcare benefits and things like that? And you have direct control over what you offer your staff to make it more attractive. And then the application interview process, there's loads in here. We could talk about this forever. But effectively, I'd say really think about what you're asking people to do, what that means from a time commitment perspective. Do those people have kind of lifestyles that, if you're trying to attract single parents, working mums, and you're saying to them, this is a 4-stage interview process where you're going to have to take days off work unpaid, you're going to have to, in your evenings, do some technical assessments. Is that realistic? And will that put off people from applying to your jobs? And if the answer is yes, potentially, then I'd think about how can we change that to make it more accessible and therefore more inclusive. And if for any of these things you don't have access to women in your organization that you could bounce ideas off, my advice would be get out there and engage with the people you're trying to attract. And there's a few great ways to do that. So I've mentioned women's networks here. I would say get out there, get into the community, engage with the types of people you're trying to bring into your business so that you can understand what their challenges are and understand what their motivators are. So joining women's networks is a great way of doing that. Anyone that's signed up to this session is clearly trying to do that. Doing things like having an internship in your workplace, there's no better way to find out if there is something in your workplace which is a problem than having somebody actually live and experience that. Now, we're all going to struggle to hire somebody and put them into the lion's den, but if you can bring somebody in for a short period of time as an intern, not only are you giving them an opportunity, you're also learning a lot from them during that process, and you get their feedback and you'll understand how you can adapt things to make it a better environment for them to want to apply for full time. And then the final one is reverse mentoring. So again, I've done a lot with male allies around this in terms of giving men more exposure to a female mindset and understanding what women want in the workplace by pairing them up as mentor and mentee. And the mentee, the female mentee, learns a lot from the male mentor, but likewise the male mentor learns just as much and comes out of it realizing that there's probably some things that they subconsciously do which are damaging their ability to hire and engage talent. Employee value proposition is then kind of the final piece of this for me. So this is super important. I think it's probably human nature to assume the worst sometimes, and we all know about imposter syndrome, and there's probably a sense that I won't belong in that organization. I'm not the type of person that works in that organization, and we'll always assume that the door is closed. So the image on the right, if you were going to apply to an organization that was hiring, just because they say they're hiring doesn't mean that you feel like you're the person they want there. It's much easier to go and walk through a door when somebody's already opened it for you. And a great way to do that is through visibility and role modeling and all those kind of things. So using them as an analogy of having a 75% female workforce, I don't think it's through any form of like nepotism or bias on her part to hire women. It absolutely will be, though, that there is a strong female role model heading up that part of the business, and people will go, actually, I know that I belong there. So by having visible female role models, and let's say using the imagery and things, that will really show the people that if they are somewhere they can apply to. And the image on the left is kind of like normal distribution of how well companies represent their employee value proposition. And I say most companies are given an image that they're not a great place to work or not a bad place to work. People just don't tend to know. Whereas Google, everyone thinks Google. I'd love to work at Google. I imagine that Google don't have to think too hard about their recruitment processes because they have this employer brand that everyone wants to align to and wants to be at. So for me, it's how can we shift the dial of our presence in the market so that organizations recognize that we are a great place to work. What are we doing to talk about that, to evidence that, and to show that? There's a whole number of ways we can do that, and it comes back exactly to what Kay said around the language you use, the images you use across every medium you have. So have a think about every way that you engage with the outside world. What could you do to emphasize the fact that you are an inclusive place to work, that you have strong female characters in that organization that are successful? So things like putting people forward for award nominations like Emma has been, using female images on your websites, on your careers pages, changing the language in your adverts to be less male dominated, doing things like outreach to schools, which Emma mentioned, volunteering, so that kids have that visibility, not just of the opportunity that exists, but also, you know, the company name will be associated with that, and that will resonate with them going forward. So every one of these images is kind of one of the areas that your organization will touch the outside world. And I think every time you touch the outside world, you should be conscious of what are you presenting to them, and is there any of that derogatory against, you know, your appetite to hire female people. And then finally, on retention, it is massively important, you know, inclusivity, mass retention. The data we've got here suggests that nearly 40% of people would move business to go to somewhere more inclusive. So it's definitely a factor that's in people's minds. And when you look at the little cogs, you'll see that millennials are even 53%. So, you know, the future generations are getting more and more aware of what a good working environment should be like, and they're less willing to take the crap that comes with working in a place that doesn't support and foster that kind of environment. And the final thing as well is, for me, once you're in an inclusive environment, comes back to what Kay said around challenging workplace, challenging mindsets. 72% of candidates are driven by personal development. So if they can't improve themselves where they are now, they will look for opportunities outside the business. So the key thing to do here is make sure that you're always challenging the people you've got in your business, always giving them somewhere to go, removing any glass ceilings. And great ways to do that are through allyship. Emma mentioned this, you know, if it wasn't for somebody suggesting to her that she applied for the IT trainer role, she might not be doing what she's doing now. So allyship and sponsorship are really key. It's about putting people forward for things that you think they'd be good for. And mentorship, again, is a great way to do that. And if you haven't got the natural mentors in the business, Kay mentioned this, there's loads of great places outside the business you can get free mentorship. Our program is one of them. It exists exactly to do that, to give women access to what they don't have in their own business. And I will cut quiet now and leave for any questions for all of the group.
Okay. Thanks very much, Kevin. That's really, really interesting, and great to have that perspective on where we are currently. I've had some really great questions in from the floor. So the first one, and I will come back to you on this one, Kevin, because of your experience from the male allyship perspective. But first of all, I just want to direct it to Kay and Emma, because I suspect they might have been on the receiving end of whatever you want to call it from time to time during their careers. But so the first question I have is, the conversations we've had today are talking about you can't be what you can't see, and how women can help each other, and how businesses can change their cultures to ensure inclusion. But the question we've been asked is, would the panel agree that everyday sexism or misogyny is essentially a problem that needs to be resolved by men? And should the focus actually be on men changing their behaviour and changes that they can make to their behaviour to help women? And just before we answer that, this is not on a bashing men perspective, but we have all probably been subjected to slights from time to time. So Emma, do you want to take the lead on that one?
Yeah, I can do. Yes and no. So I have had moments where I've been made to feel uncomfortable, I think is probably the way I would put it. And I can think of one time in particular where a male pointed it out to the person who was, and that was great. Actually, that really made a big difference, because I don't know if I would have said, do you understand what you've just said? It is quite difficult. And it is still an awkward conversation to have with people. But I think the more people who talk about it, and the more it is addressed in forums like this and publicly, the better it will get. I would say, that's a very, very long time ago. It doesn't really happen now. I lead my team in a way where I don't want any of the females who work for me to ever feel uncomfortable about doing their job just because they're a girl. That to me is absolutely ridiculous, because I've been doing it as long as I have, and you know, and that's fine. But I really do. I don't think it necessarily needs to be fixed by men. But I think we can all support each other, and it is going to, you know, it's going to take a village. It's not something that any one person can fix on their own. It's the entire business, male and female, all need to address that to make it work.
I'd absolutely echo what Emma's just said. I think it's not something that sits at the door of the males in the business. I think it's a company-wide educational piece. Again, I think the same as Emma, my experiences were from a good kind of 8-9 years ago. And it was typically the white middle-aged male who was our key client. And I think that stems down to a lack of diversity at that time, both from a client perspective and from an internal agency perspective. The playing field is very different now, but I think there is education that needs to be done in businesses about the kind of narrative and the conversations that everybody's happy to have. So, for example, we're big pushers of saying, you know, thank you for your patience, as opposed to sorry, I'm late, or just flipping what those small iterations are, both on email and in a verbal setting. And I think the more people are educated, you know, when individuals spot instances of misogyny in those scenarios, someone's able to say, actually, I don't think that was technically right. Could you just not talk over so-and-so and let her finish her piece? Or apologies, let's go back to you because you had a really good point. So the more people are aware of that, the more we can kind of start to flip that table. But it's an education piece, I think, more so. Fine.
And then Kevin, I mean, Emma gave a really great example of a male in the room pointing out a behaviour to someone else, and perhaps when Kay had experienced being required to take notes if someone else in the room had offered to pick up the pen on her behalf, for example. Those are all types of behaviours that support women in that type of environment. And I want to be careful that we're not allocating blame for people who don't understand a particular perspective, but you are working quite hard in terms of male allyship, and I just wanted to get your perspective on that question.
Yeah, I think, you know, if we depersonalize it and take the male and female tags out of it, I just think generally the majority in a scenario should always be conscious of what they're doing that affects the minority in the scenario. And I'd say, you know, we have an obligation to be the best that we can and make sure that we're not adding anything to that issue. So again, it regardless of if it is, you know, misogyny in the workplace or racism or, you know, being alienating somebody because they're a different faith, I think if we're all conscious that, you know, we make up the majority of that, therefore we probably have the more positions of influence, more positions of power, and therefore we have a duty basically to look after the people that don't have that power. I think the world will be a better place in general. And I think it works both ways though. So for me, I think women's networks and women in general, and, you know, be that IFAS or a Black network, have to be welcoming to people from outside that community to be able to come into the conversation. So I think everyone needs to talk about these things, understand the education piece only works if people are willing to have people outside of that sphere come and listen and understand and learn from it. And it's only through that kind of open communication that we can make things better.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and that's why I've deliberately made these events, you know, welcome to all genders, because I absolutely agree that it has to be an all parties conversation without wanting to sound too much like a lawyer on that one. So that's fine. So the next question that I have relates to the relationship between businesses and decision makers. So the example that has been given in the question is the announcement that we're expecting to receive from the Chancellor to reduce benefits for individuals who work part-time, because a huge proportion of those individuals are likely to be working mothers, because generally at the moment people who work part-time tend to be the caregivers, and, you know, there aren't really any steps that we're currently aware of in terms of tackling issues such as unaffordable childcare. So the question is, if businesses and industries banded together to put pressure on policymakers to improve those types of conditions, would that be a way to enact real change? Kevin, I'm going to come back to you on that one initially.
That's a pretty deep one, isn't it? Wow, thanks for that. So I don't know enough about the recent changes, but my personal experience with it, I grew up as a child of a single working mom. I've got relatives who have young kids and therefore don't work because it's not economically viable to. So I absolutely think that there are issues around making work beneficial. I absolutely think that the government and the workforce should do more to make it so that if you are working part-time, it is actually better off than you being on benefits. I think there are big issues around that whole fact of, because of the cost of childcare and things like that, it's illogical sometimes to go to work. So yeah, I definitely think that the only way you're going to change that from a government perspective and the policy perspective is by the power of big corporates that are passionate about that kind of thing.
I agree with that. I think I don't know how we change it now, but it is definitely something that needs to be changed. I mean, unaffordable childcare I have got friends who no longer go to work because they're basically going to work for £20 by the time they've paid for childcare and put their kids in nursery. And that is not a situation we would like to encourage, because it is generally mum who ends up giving up work. I know other people where it isn't, but the majority of cases it will be. And then that puts you on a back step when you do come back to work. I know other people who've planned their children around when they got the 30 hours free and the next, and when this kid starts school, I can then afford to have another one because they can be in childcare. And that's a really sort of difficult situation for some people. Yeah. So I feel very strongly that something needs to change around that. And I think, businesses should have the ability to get together and try and help make change happen. Or does that become a part of a benefit, or is there something else that's with it? But at the moment, obviously, it's not quite the case yet, is it?
Kay, do you want to feed into that?
Yeah, absolutely. Kudos to whoever sent that question in. That's a wonderful question. I mean, our business is part of the CBI network, and our CEO is quite vocal in those circles in terms of elevating what the business issues are and how certain issues and themes are brought for discussion in the wider economy. I think I'm incredibly passionate about giving women the space to be able to be a mum, but also progress their career at the same time. And I think whilst we can't impact change at a higher level, business owners need to do more to allow individuals who want a family coming back to be able to do both. So that is things like being Flexer certified, and maybe individuals looking to get into this space, specifically searching for agencies or tech businesses who are certified by a Flexer, because then they can work part-time. And the whole ethos around Flexer is that you can work around the hours that suit you for any other external commitments. I still think, I mean, the UK childcare costs are the second highest in the world. And it's virtually impossible to do both. And I think the onus sits with, as I said, business owners to be able to allow people under their guise, I think under their employment, to be able to have a pathway to have a progressive career and have children in around that, and then reintegrate back into the workforce without needing to miss anything or miss out on anything. It's something we've worked really, really hard with at Freestyle, and now we've got people who are returning back from mat leave. And I think having the hindsight of being in that position myself, same as Emma, exactly what not to do and what to do. So we've got really slow, gradual integrations back into the business, just to allow for, the eventualities of babies being poorly and so on and so forth. But that needs to apply to both men and women. It's not specifically just to women. So my answer in a nutshell is it needs to be directed at business owners. They're the people who need to enact change. If they're going to have that diversification of workforce and talent and skill, then the onus sits with them at this stage, I feel.
Brilliant, thank you. And that actually leads really nicely into our next question, which I hope the person who posed the question will forgive me for modifying slightly. So the question that's been asked is whether Kay and Emma, you've ever felt any pressure to compete with male counterparts because you've had childcare commitments. And the bit that I'm just going to add on, because I'm conscious of the fast-paced nature of technology. So assuming that you both took time out with maternity leave, coming back, do you think it was particularly challenging in a technological world to come back from maternity leave, having taken a significant chunk of time out of work? Kay, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, another great question. I absolutely have felt like I've had to compete with male counterparts. But I think I've been on both sides. So me pre-children, I was looking at the people leaving at 5 o'clock going, oh, we've still got loads of work to do, blah, 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 blah. And then flip it to, 10 years later and I've got 2 young children and I have to leave at a certain time. I think it's an interesting question. I think partly you have to own your role and your place in that business. So if you need to leave at a certain time, you need to make others aware that you need to leave at a time and hold true to that, because you've got other dependents. It's that feeling of guilt that you think, oh, I've got to dip out and without anybody noticing, that needs to change. And again, it's that narrative in the business of making that we accept parents, we accept working mothers, working fathers. People have to have other commitments and be able to leave. I think going back to the line about competing with male counterparts, I absolutely have, but equally been able to kind of set my own parameters, and even on client emails saying I'm working till 5 o'clock and then I've got to go and do a nursery pickup. So if you need me, it's between these times. And I think females especially, we're very self-servient. We'll go, oh no, it's okay. We'll pick it up and we'll work it in and around what we're doing. It's just by default of our character. But I think we can do more to kind of say, this is my stall. And same for men. I've got to pick up at this time. I could do meetings between here and here and then I'm off. And quite often working parents are more efficient than those without children because they're used to juggling multiple plates at the same time. I'd probably throw that question over to Emma now to see if she agrees.
I do, definitely. So I work full time, but I do adjusted hours so that I can finish at particular times when I need to. I have definitely competed with male counterparts over childcare commitments, and sometimes I do sometimes just have to go. I have a poorly child today, and I said before this, she may turn up at some point. But I think it really matters to me now that as much as work means an awful lot to me, if my kids need me, I'm gonna go, and that's supported. I work in an environment, luckily, I mean, Mills Reeve is very family friendly in that respect anyway, but when I have had situations, so a few years ago one of my children was poorly and was in hospital for a couple of weeks, and there was absolutely no question around whether or not I was going to go to work the next day. That wasn't even suggested. In fact, I just got flowers and presents and chocolates and things sent through to me and cards and stuff, and that the culture there means so much to me, and that's why 17 years and 2 weeks later I'm still here, and it really is around being a supportive and looking after that. Coming back from maternity leave, that was eye-opening, to be honest. I was an IT trainer, and we'd rolled out 2 systems in the year I've been off. And I came back and not only did I not feel ready to do my job, I didn't know what it was anymore. I didn't know how to do the stuff that I knew how to do a year before. Yes, it all comes back very quickly, but it is something that actually I think people do need more support with. And technology is so fast paced that actually in 9 months, a year, 6 months, however long you have off, quite a lot can change.
Yeah. Something we've started to look at in our business is aligning people who've just returned from mat leave or pat leave with someone who's done that and they're a year or so further into the business. So their little one might be 1 or something, and kind of pair them up. And, there may be people that they already are aware of in the business, but it's kind of saying, great, this is how I'm getting on and how I juggle it all. And then these individuals don't feel so alone, because luckily, same as Emma, I work in a really supportive environment. But when we're looking at attracting women to the tech sector, culture is probably the most important thing. I think over salary, if it was a choice between having somewhere that had flexible hybrid approach that could work around a young family, or a massive salary that meant you had to ship your family off to someone else. I know which one most of my counterparts and peers would select. So just about what you put at the front of your stall to attract those skills, I guess.
Yeah, I think I'm conscious of time, but I think as well, employers have an obligation to shift the narrative a bit and take up the stigma away from it being the woman that's expected to take the early finish or the leave. I'm sure there's lots of men out there who would like to support their partners more, but they probably feel like if they said to their boss, I'm taking shared parental leave after the pregnancy, that wouldn't be understood, and they'd be kind of, are you serious? Like, you're going to take a few months off work because your wife's had a baby? Or I'm going to be the one that's staying at home today because the kid's ill. People would typically historically go, can the mum not take the day off today? Like, so I think we need to shift the expectation that it is the woman that is the primary and sole carer, and that will make it then easier for men to support their partners, which will hopefully help address the balance a bit.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much. It's been such an interesting conversation with you all, and I'm delighted that you were able to share your time with us today. So thank you ever so much. We've already had some great feedback in the QA to say thanks very much for your valid points. So brilliant. It's been really interesting, and just with one eye on the time and conscious that we're running slightly over, I'll say thank you and draw this to a close.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Bye.